Good morning, everyone. I'm Bill Roebuck. I'm the Executive Vice President at the Arab Gulf States Institute here. Our discussion today is focused on Mohammed Soliman's new book, West Asia, a New American Grand Strategy for the Middle East, or in the Middle East. And we'll explore the notion in the course of our discussion that the traditional Middle East framework is obsolete, and that what is required is a new U.S. strategy built around a broader, interconnected West Asia, spanning from the Mediterranean to the Indo-Pacific to restore geopolitical balance. We're delighted to welcome Mohammed Soliman for this discussion of his new book. Mohammed, welcome. Thank you. To introduce Mohammed quickly, he's a trained engineer and a director at McLarty Associates, where he advises investors and companies on strategic and policy issues at the intersection of technology, artificial intelligence, finance, and energy. In addition, he's a senior fellow at the Middle East Institute, a non-resident senior fellow at the Foreign Policy Research Institute, and a visiting fellow at the National Security Program at Third Wave. Our moderator for today's program is Ambassador Douglas Silliman. Doug is president of the Arab Gulf States Institute. He previously served as U.S. Ambassador to Iraq from 2016 to 19, and U.S. Ambassador to Kuwait from 2014 to 16. He retired from the Foreign Service in 2019 after a distinguished 35-year career. Books are available and will be available for purchase and signing at the conclusion of today's ceremony. Mohammed, welcome again. Doug, over to you to lead our discussion.
Bill, thank you for the introduction. And Mohammed, welcome to the Arab Gulf States Institute. Despite the fact that we were separated at birth and somebody got the names of our fathers spelled wrong on the birth certificates, we have bumped into each other a lot on what I might call the falafel circuit in the Gulf, standing in lines for coffee urns, but waiting in line to get onto airplanes, going to and from places here and in the Gulf. So we spent a lot of time talking without any particular agenda. And I'm actually very pleased to have a conversation with Mohammed with a much more specific agenda, and that is the concepts that he has laid out in the new book, West Asia. My wife wondered why I made so many notes on this in the past week, and I said, there's a lot in here that I have to ask Mohammed about. So I'm going to do that right now. Now, Mohammed, you know that I am a practitioner, not an academic, and I appreciate the pragmatic bent of this book, including some policy recommendations at the end that we'll get to later in the conversation. But I want to introduce the book first by starting with a couple of quotes from the book. First one is from near the end of the concluding chapter. The motivating force behind this book is not merely to recast the Middle East as West Asia, but to reimagine the exercise of American power in the 21st century. And from in the middle of the book, also to serve Washington's broader contest with China. But again, from the end of the book, this book furnishes a strategic calculus, not really for Americans, but for Arab, European, and Asian policymakers pursuing a balanced order grounded in converging interests rather than ideological crusades. So, Mohammed, my first question is, to whom is this book directed? Is it American policymakers? Is it the American military? Is it Asian leaders? Is it the titans of industry looking to see where their next investments and products will be coming from or going to?
Ambassador, first of all, this is a lot. Thank you so much for the hospitality, having me here, having the chance to present the book. I want to recognize my father-in-law, Dan Quigley, who's visiting us from Tucson, Arizona. His granddaughter, my daughter, is 1 year old, so this is a special occasion for us. Thank you for your friendship, for being a travel companion to Doha, Riyadh, Abu Dhabi, Dubai all these years. So I absolutely appreciate your intellect, your work, your career in the U.S. Foreign Service. Let me respond to your question in a much more direct fashion. What's the urgency that I have in the book? The urgency I have in the book is America has limited resources. America is distracted, not focused. And we have a rising power in the Indo-Pacific, China, that has a geoeconomic vision for what Asia under Chinese leadership would look like. This is not where America is. America is distracted. I made the case in the book that I think that the biggest geopolitical mistake in the last 25 years is the invasion of Iraq in 2003. And I'm making the case that a lot of the trends that we're seeing in the Middle East are driving from this original sin in Iraq. And this book, I'm not only talking to American policymakers, well, they are the primary audience, of course. I am talking to allied capitals in Europe, in Asia, who have vested interest in building what I call in that book, Asia minus China framework, a connecting system, interlinked coalitions from the Mediterranean Sea to the Indian Ocean. And I go at the greater length in the book, chapter by chapter, by trying to go through what I mean by Asia minus China. What does it mean for Europe? What does it mean for West Asia? What does it mean for the rest of the Asian landmass? Meaning, I am not casting America as the only integrator of that sort of coalition, of that sort of system. I'm casting America as one of those co-pilots. I want America to pivot to a co-pilot mode because, again, as an engineer, this is the one thing I care about is American resources. I think the term I tried also to introduce so many terms, this is why I'm terrified by your notes, is America's skill problem. I think my thesis is vindicated by the current war. America has a skill problem when it comes to its own resources. And this book is trying to put two hats at the same time, the intellectual hat, but also the practitioner hat, trying to figure out how this means from a practical standpoint. I'm taking great pain in the last section trying to figure out how can this vision be much more operational. I don't want to give you a big grand idea, a big grand strategy, and not really go into details. I think the details do matter. I think details are part of this sort of grand strategy that I'm proposing in my book.
So let me go a little bit into some of the historical antecedents or concepts that underlie West Asia. Now, as somebody who's been to the pyramids, who's been to Nineveh, walked on the ziggurat of Ur, been in Oman for the old Magan civilization, been to Mohenjo-daro in Pakistan on the Indus River, there is a 4,000 or 5,000 year old historical antecedent of the trade and the political relationships between ancient Egypt all the way into what is now South Asia, with some even later trade along the Silk Road with China. Explain how this, how can I say, informed your concept of West Asia.
So for 2 years, I commuted between Washington, D.C. and Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. And seeing the Gulf through that sort of eye of a traveler, when I say commuted, I mean commuted, like every few months, every few weeks, I'm living two lives. I have two homes in two different countries at the same time, and that was second year of COVID. I think seeing the demographics of Saudi, traveling from Saudi to Tokyo, to Delhi, to other Gulf states, specifically Doha and Abu Dhabi, those capitals, I think you start rethinking about the question of capital, trade, demographics, security links differently. And reflecting on that, you think that the current map that we have, or what we call the Middle East, doesn't really explain some of those sort of new trends that I go at a great length trying to explain. So what are those big trends that I make the case cannot be explained through the Middle East lens? A, how can you explain India's increasing role in the Mediterranean Sea, alliance with Israel, increasing partnership with Greece, with Cyprus? How can you, on the other hand of this equation, explain Ankara's strategy in South Asia, engagement with Bangladesh, with Pakistan, with the Maldives? How can you explain the role that the Gulf states are playing when it comes to East Africa, Horn of Africa, and the role as diplomats between the Russians, Ukrainians, Taliban, the United States, Rwanda, DRC? Those sort of geopolitical realities that we're seeing today cannot really be explained by this sort of limited geography Alfred Mahan invented in 1902, saying that this is the Middle East, this is Egypt, this is Iran, this is how you should think about this map. I don't think that this map captures what we're seeing today, because also let me reiterate this. I'm not trying to bring Edward Said Orientalism into geopolitics. I'm not fixated on changing the name Middle East, because for some reason I am, this is a book within the anti-colonial tradition. This is a book within the realpolitik tradition. This is a book that's trying to figure out where the world is today and what does it mean for American power. So I'm making that case within American gun strategy. I'm making this case within American national interest. I'm not making this case just because of an intellectual exercise.
There was a name that came up several times in the book. My favorite modern era Japanese politician, unfortunately now assassinated and no longer with us, Shinzo Abe, and comments on his, I guess, infamous speech, Confluence of Two Seas, which also has some historical antecedents. How did that inform your idea of linking Asia and the Mediterranean through West Asia?
If I had Japanese under my belt as a language, I think my first book would have been biography of Shinzo Abe as a strategist, as a statesman. I don't think I have that capacity. I don't think that will be my project. And I think he had a great influence on me. I did not meet him in person, did not spend time with him in person. However, I did attend lectures that he has given as a statesman. I was here in Washington during the time when the Japanese led that sort of intellectual conquest here in Washington to rebrand the Asia-Pacific as the Indo-Pacific. And that traces back to two inflection points. One, when Shinzo Abe came to power, he tried to push his country forward, a country that was overly demilitarized after the end of the Second World War. And he had to push the Japanese public towards rearmament, towards the idea there's a rising China on the other side of Asia, and there's going to be posing a different challenge to Japanese power. The second part of it was America was very much entrenched into the Eurasian landmass, Afghanistan, Iraq, of course. And on top of that, we had the tsunami disaster at that time. So we had at that time what we call the Quad, which is United States, Australia, Japan, India, to start doing humanitarian work off the coast of Indonesia, and that was in 2007. So Shinzo Abe figured out that this sort of Quad group should be fit together into a strategic framework. And that was the Indo-Pacific. And this is something that he laid out in his famous speech, Confluence of the Two Seas. And also to give you an idea about how he's thinking about geostrategy, he dig into the text to figure out there is a text in the Indian history about the relationship between Islam and Hinduism, about the confluence of the original two seas, in this case was the Arabian Sea and the Indian Ocean, took that sort of framework and said, this is the confluence of the two seas, but in this case is the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. And we have to rethink about geography, because this is important to Japanese power projection and to rule in India, bring India from the cold after the end of the Cold War, making India a player in that sort of anti-hegemonic coalition vis-a-vis China. And then that framework ended up being dormant for so many years until it was resurrected in 2017. And like I mentioned earlier, the Japanese planners started pushing the Trump administration, first administration, into that sort of rebranding and then coming up with that sort of framework, open and free Indo-Pacific. And based on that, we shifted the Pacific Command into the Indo-Pacific Command from an operational standpoint. So why this story is important for me? A, because this is a statesman that recognized that changing the definition of geography is important to national interest, important to grand strategy, and most importantly, important to military operations and design. So this is not just a fantasy, let's go fight over words. When you change the map, you change the different players, you're able to bring to that sort of construct. B, we have done this before. So I'm not coming up with something crazy. I'm basically borrowing, I'm outing myself. I am saying that sort of strategic and changing of the maps have happened before in one of the most important strategic theater of United States power in the 21st century, and this is the Indo-Pacific. So let's think about that differently within the question of the Middle East, because I think that that sort of a space that separated the Mediterranean Ocean, the Mediterranean Sea, Red Sea, Arabian Sea, Indian Ocean, no longer exists. You cannot think about Turkey as just a Mediterranean power. That's not really the case anymore. You cannot think about India as a rising power in the Indian Ocean. You cannot think about the Middle East or this old Middle East as this is the same place that we left in 2003 in Iraq. That's no longer the case. I've vindicated even by today the very idea that you have Egypt, Turkey, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and Islamabad trying to come up with a framework to open the Strait of Hormuz, that they are trying to do that hand in hand with the Chinese. It vindicates the idea that your old Middle East cannot capture this moment, cannot analyze that moment.
Then let me raise the third concept that you maybe not coined, but used a lot, and that is the Asianization of the Middle East.
I did coin that one.
Okay, I couldn't remember which ones you actually coined. This may have been one of them. Yes.
So the Asianization of the Middle East, and this is also a reflection of my job. I have two jobs. I work in corporate America, but also I work in a think tank. In corporate America, everything is about the Asianization of the global order. Everything is about the Asianization of supply chain, of technology. So when I'm making the case is Asianization of the Middle East, I'm making the case that you cannot understand the Gulf without understanding the rise of Asia. You cannot understand the Gulf without how this Gulf region, West Asian region, is being part of an overarching Asian order. Again, back to the idea of Asia minus China, but you have the China question, you have the Asia minus China framework. And you see this through multiple factors. You see this through the role that those Gulf states are playing in terms of aviation. For you to fly from London anywhere in Asia, you have to use Qatar Airways or Etihad, Fly Emirates. For you to move goods around like a vast geography around the region landmass, you have to use Dubai ports. For you to build actual AI infrastructure, you need Gulf financing, either France, Italy, India, Indonesia. So the idea that those Gulf states are shaped by Asia, but also shaping Asia. It's two trends happening at the same time. And I'm using multiple examples of how this Asianization is taking place, concrete ones, beyond the idea of you fly through Etihad to Tokyo. Think about the amount of trade that's taking place between India and the Gulf states. Just to give people one example, a few months ago, in 2026, we had the India-EU trade agreement that took almost 20 years to come to fruition. Goods and services, volume-wise, we're speaking about $180 billion. Trade between India and United Arab Emirates, the UAE, is about $9,500 billion. That would be doubled in 5 years, in 2030. The trade between India and Saudi Arabia, which is very close to Pakistan, is 45 billion, 50 billion, will be doubled in 5 years. So I would argue that the amount of trade between India and EU, the 27 states, almost the same as India's trade, again, one of the biggest economies globally, with Saudi and UAE alone. That gives you an idea that trade itself, the reorientation of trade, is giving you a prime example of that sort of Asianization. Same thing applies to ASEAN. When you're thinking about EVs, thinking about minerals, maritime buildups, you will see Indonesia, you will see Vietnam coming up in the story of Saudi Arabia and UAE. When they might send their own space mission to Mars, it was Japan that did the launch. When the UAE decided to build a nuclear program, it was the Koreans. So the idea of Asianization is very clear. You see it in the day-to-day aspects of West Asia. And I think I tried to do this, trying to add intellectual framework to understand that sort of trend that's going to be growing from now on.
Okay, the first really hard question. And it's basically, what is West Asia? But let me give you a multiple choice question. You said in your book, West Asia is a space, quote, that encompasses the Middle East and South Asia and connects Europe to the Indo-Pacific via the Mediterranean and Red Sea. So is this a defined geographic region? Or two, West Asia is an attempt to, quote, reconstruct a balance of power in the Middle East by redefining its boundaries, implying that there are actually boundaries to the Middle East and to West Asia. Or three, is West Asia a flexible, opportunistic concept of converging interests based on economics or potentially politics? Or D, is it something else? Or E, a little bit of all of it?
It's actually very difficult. I think it is all of the above. It is a story of a region that used to exist, and I'm making a reference to an intellectual that I deeply respect, Janet Abolok, before European hegemony, and she has a very famous text that I really appreciate, and it's central to my core thesis, Before European Hegemony. She's talking about the trade networks that existed in 1150 to 1250, and I think I encourage all of you to read it. And she's making the case that there was a multi-civilizational trade networks that existed before the Portuguese landed on the shores of India in 1498. So I'm not inventing something really new, right? Like that sort of dynamic has always existed. But at the same time, it kind of became under a European/British construct for at least 200 years, that those connections faded away, did not really exist anymore. So you're trying to redefine the geography, but you're also trying to go back to your roots. It's something different. It's not before European hegemony. I think it's a fusion because you have different players. You also have strong American presence that's not going anywhere. I don't believe in American decline. I think America is going to be shaping some of those strategic frameworks. And on top of that, I'm trying to make the realist case for why this construct is helpful for all these capitals from Tokyo to Delhi to Riyadh, Abu Dhabi to Cairo, Rome, to Paris. I'm saying that this is your own strategic framework, and I'm going at a great length trying to say, well, West Asia is what matters to Europe after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. You're trying to go through your own identity search for what's new for Europe. I'm trying to tell India that this is your space. I'm trying to tell Japan, Korea, and Taiwan that this is your space. I'm trying to also make all these players have a stake into that sort of construct as well.
So let me think a little bit about old think and think about the Middle East and how it is currently constructed and currently understood. You make the argument several places in your book that there is a real unbalance of power and influence in the old Middle East. Can you explain what that is and how that is leading to a concept that works better with West Asia than the old idea of the Middle East?
I think Iran war is of course a horrific situation, but it vindicated a lot of the assumptions that I had about the book, especially the sort of statement. In the old Middle East, there's no Pakistan negotiating. That doesn't exist. In the old Middle East, there's no Modi in Israel before Iran war. I think this framework that we have at hand can justify how Pakistan, through its own defense pact with Saudi Arabia, through its own relationship with China, how this is able to bring a certain sort of consortium around the Iran question, around the Hormuz Strait question, that's acting side by side vis-a-vis the United States. That's hard to explain through the Middle East. And I would also argue that maybe the idea of choosing certain states to be mediators, that was wrong. Maybe they did not have the capacity for it. Maybe we need that sort of a multi-theater player to play that role, who has a very strong geographic level of maneuverability that allows it to play that role vis-a-vis Iran. I'm not sure how this is going to go. This is why I'm a bit hesitant to embrace this right now, because we're in the middle of the war, so we have this fog of war dynamic, but this is how I see it today.
So those of you in the audience, if you have questions, we'll open up in just a minute for some specific questions for Mohammed. But I would like to ask one last question about West Asia. And again, there's not really a clear answer, I don't imagine, but in your concept, is West Asia inclusive or exclusive? In other words, are you born into West Asia? Do you join West Asia? Or are you excluded from West Asia? And is there like a website or app or anything like that that goes with West Asia?
I need to buy this domain. So I'm making the case in the book that a system is not only built on cooperation, a system is also built on competition. So I'm making the case you have multiple orders within West Asia that actually cohering that system. So I use the example of India to Greece, Cyprus, Israel. I'm also using the example of Turkey, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Maldives. I'm also using that sort of Egypt-Saudi question about where they're going to be in this sort of new constructs. And all these together are cohering that system. It's basically make that sort of theater engagement a reality. And you're going to have multiple frameworks. You're going to have multiple multilateral agreements / defense pacts, connectivity initiatives, and all confirm the same thesis, the idea that from the Indian Ocean to the Mediterranean Sea are like basically becoming one system. So you have the India, Middle East, Europe corridor, and this was a 2023 initiative on the sidelines of G20 in Delhi. You also have the Turkey-led development road, and now with the situation in Syria stabilizing in favor of Turkey and Saudi Arabia, that will be something they're going to see. Again, confirms the same thesis that you are not going to be reliant on one framework or one idea of a framework. You have the Saudi, Egypt, Turkey, Pakistan, but you also have the ITU too, the India, Middle East, the India, UAE, US, Israel framework as well. You're going to have multiple of those, and they all vindicate the same thesis. At the end of the day, you're not going to have also, let me add this because this is very important. I'm not really calling those alliances, and I'm very skeptical of calling any of those frameworks alliances at all. I'm saying you're going to have a lot of overlap. You're going to have a lot of gray areas. You're going to have different countries going to be switching, depends on the interest. And I think this is going to be the main driving force in this sort of new West Asian orientation of the Middle East.
I'll ask the first time, does anybody have a question? Okay, please.
Mohammed, thank you for an interesting new analysis. And when I looked at your book, West Asia, for the past 75 years, we didn't talk about West Asia, we talked about the greater Middle East. But to go back to your thesis about Japan, India, Pakistan, for the Arab component of West Asia, mainly the Gulf, in places like Jordan and Egypt, America remains the superpower that provides security that Japan cannot do, that India cannot do. The thing about India that's unique, you have a huge Indian population in the Gulf. And then when you listen to what's happening today, India is trying to also mediate between the US and Iran. What's the formula behind the Indian connection with Iran?
Excellent question, and let me clarify some points. I am not really making the case of replacing America in the Middle East. That's not really the case. I am making the case that America's strong is entrenched power. I'm making the case that America should pivot to be offshore balancer. I think it's the only country that can do that. No one has aircraft carrier to move to Mediterranean and the Red Sea for operations. That's very exceptional to America. I'm making the case in the book that you need coalitions to manage certain aspects of security. And the two things that were the number one, number two in the book in the military section was integrated air defense system, and B was maritime security coalition. And I think the war showed that you need integrated air defense system. And one of the interesting facts was the role that the Koreans have played in the support and defense of the UAE. That you have Korean assets, of course, owned by the Emiratis, operated by the Emiratis. But the very idea that this is a different sort of procurement process than the traditional America-centered view. The same thing when it comes to Italians. The Italian munition is also in the UAE. The very idea you have French fighter jets over the skies of the Gulf. So you need to allow others to play a role. You need to do burden shifting, because I don't believe that we have the resources to continue to play that role. When you're moving a THAAD battery from Korea to CENTCOM area of responsibility, that means you are very much stretched thin on the scale question, on the military assets question. This is not sustainable. You have Ukraine happening. You have Iran. You have 3-year wars in the Middle East, never stopped. And you have Taiwan, and I have no idea how the situation over there will go. So the case I make in the book, that was never sustainable before Iran. And clearly, it's getting complicated because of the Iran war. And you need to bring other players to play a security role. But a security role does not mean an imperial-esque power that's resident taking over the Gulf. Those Gulf capitals are going through rally around the flag effect. They're going to invest more in their own defense systems, procurement, their own national identity. They're going to have a different security questions after this war. And I don't think they accept the idea of another power replacing America right now.
If I may just, when you look at the GCC today, General Jim Jones suggested 10 years ago in Abu Dhabi about forming an Arab NATO. But when you talk to officials, even 2 weeks ago, Oman has a different outlook. The Emiratis have a different outlook. Saudi Arabia now is thinking about an Arab NATO. So before you set up an integrated defense system, there are political differences. How do you overcome that?
I think you should read the book. So I am talking about tiered participation system. I am actually making the case that NATO is a very exceptional architecture to European environment post-1945. I am making the explicit case that NATO is not the benchmark for building security coalitions. NATO is exceptional because of the Cold War, managing the German question and also the French question as well, in terms of relationship with the United States. Very exceptional because of geography. That's not replicated anywhere. And this is not actually the nature of our alliances around the globe. I'm making the case we need tiered system around certain goods, and with that sort of criteria, it fits certain people's needs. It fits certain French needs, certain Japanese needs. Maritime security, I mean, the president today, and again, no matter how we feel about his statements, said if you are hurt by the Hormuz Strait, go open it. This is going to be the new norm. If you have a stake, if you have an equity in certain aspects that requires participation, you have to do it right now. You have to participate. And I think in the book, I'm trying to figure out what's the coalition structure. And again, it's a coalition structure. It will never be Article 5. You will never have Article 5 commitment, Arab NATO. I don't believe that this is going to be the case. But could you make the case for an integrated air defense system, given the Iranian threat perception and how they're thinking about how they have targeted infrastructure across the Gulf? I think that's the question. The same thing applies to maritime security around freedom of navigation in the Hormuz Strait. I think those two things, specifically those two things, are common security goods that, and you can build coalitions around them, and you can have different partners, different players there, without really being dragged into Article 5 NATO alliance side. Right here, please.
It'll be interesting to see the intelligence integration in the area as well. I'm Peter Humphrey. I'm a intelligence analyst and a former diplomat, and a talking head in the Middle East for some television stations. And I was your INR analyst on Iraq. My question is, if we really want long-term peace, shouldn't we embrace the Wilsonian concepts of self-determination and allow Iraq, a British construct with its straight lines, to fall into the three natural pieces that the Brits forced together?
Wow, that's a nice question. I have no idea. I have no idea. I'm going to give you the worst answer from intellectual. I don't know. I think there is, of course, aspects of different sort of ideological views on how you should arrange the region. I think we kind of escaped that sort of idea that we would allow. I don't know. I don't really have a framework to answer your question. It's a very tough one. Come back here, please.
Mohammed, good to see you again. For everybody else, Carlos Roa, former managing editor, National Interest, and Mohammed's occasional intellectual partner. We have not sat down and had the 4-hour boozy discussion on Iran, but in lieu of that, / preparation for that, does not the Iran war kind of complicate the situation with the Gulf states, since now they're in the front line, they're realizing, wait a second, we're the ones suffering the immediate, blasts, energy is offline, UAE is deleveraging assets to pay for the dirham parity, et cetera, probably do force majeure on AI deals because suddenly, we need the money, and I probably suspect that's why OpenAI is saying, hey, private equity, please give us money. So does this whole arrangement between the Gulf states and the United States still make sense if they're kind of realizing, wait a second, we thought, we don't want security providers, but we thought we'd be getting more than we're getting, and now that we see the actual costs, this changes things.
I think it's a very fair and excellent question. So let's unpack that a bit. Is there an alternative to the United States? Is there an alternative to American power? I don't believe that this is the case. I don't think so. I think still that principle, will you see Gulf retreat from the United States alliance? I don't see that as well at all. I actually think that you're going to have more entrenched US Gulf dynamic after the war. 3, and this is important, a lot of people are quick to say that the Gulf exceptionalism is over, that those are cities built on sand and the war exposed them. I think I'm on the other side of this argument. I think this is absolutely still like an Orientalist view on the Gulf states. I think they were resilient. I think they were able and capable of defending themselves. You have seen the interception rates coming from the Emiratis, the Saudis, the Qataris. I think the fundamentals about the transformation, the fundamentals around building AI infrastructure in the Gulf did not change. It did not change in terms of the capital dedicated to building those compute capacity over there. It did not change in terms of latency, geography, in terms of the enterprise layer, the relationship that's very entrenched with US frontier labs, specifically OpenAI with the Emirati cluster in Abu Dhabi. Don't get me wrong, it's not rosy, right? The risk profile of the Gulf will change, but it doesn't mean that the Gulf experiment is over. I think they're going to recalibrate. They're going to figure out what are going to be the dynamics, the conditions of this sort of settlement with Iran, which again, I think is going to be a settlement. I never believed that regime change was an objective that America can attain, given all the things that we know about the theater, about Iran. and I think they're gonna have a lot of recalibration after this war. But I don't think that will mean an end of the U.S. alliance. I know a lot of analysts are saying that this is dead. I think, of course, they are irritated by the inconsistency in Washington. I mean, everyone is. I mean, we are. So that's something different.
Let me hop on top of this question, because I was going to talk about your security and cooperation architecture. And one of the things that you say in the book is that alliances are no longer, quote unquote, the bedrock of US power projection, which is essentially what you just said. And that the US must, quote unquote, do more with less, which is, I guess, intuitive, but doesn't have a lot of meaning underneath it. You explained it in your book as that you wanted to see the United States move from being a security guarantor with partners to a leader among security partners to first among equals over time, in what I assume is a voluntary partnership, something short of a treaty alliance, and that is likely to have changing and moving goals, technology, needs for interoperability. The question that I have, though, is if you look at, for example, the structure of military cooperation within the GCC, it requires unanimity. And this has been one of the things that has made it very difficult for the GCC to be an effective military partner across the board with the United States and with each other. And you seem to have come up with a solution to that by saying, in the Middle East, more for more, less for less. So can you unpack all that I just said, the framework that you put together for your spider charts of spiderweb charts of cooperation on military and economic ideas, and how do you deal with pre-existing rules that have hampered cooperation in very crucial areas like the GCC? Do you jettison Oman and do the 5 countries inside the Gulf? Or how do you structure a tiered system of partnership?
It's very tough, and also a reflection of the notes that you have in the book. More for more, less with less. This is basically the framework I have in mind. The case I'm making that America's resource constraint, and I kept saying this over and over in my talk, in my conversation with you, and I keep stressing this point. Because I'm making the case that America doesn't have a choice other than building architecture that embeds American power and allows America to move resources that we need in a different theater. In this case, is the Indo-Pacific. That's my case. It's plain. I'm not gonna sit here and sugarcoat it and tell you that we can do everything. We can walk and chew gum. We can do Ukraine. We can do Iran. We can do Taiwan. No, we can't. No, we can't. That's not possible. We, as a country, did move in the, if you remember, the defense strategy of 2017 from a 2-war military into one theater military. And by the way, when we had transition of power to President Biden, they did not change it back. That means there's a recognition in the Pentagon that we cannot do 2 major wars at the same time. That's a fundamental fact, and this should be the source of our own analysis, our own policy prescription. So what I mean by that, we need to go build architecture that gives America the ability to do more with less, politically, economically, technologically. And of course, I would say Ukraine is one of those. And the Middle East is the second. In Europe, even though I don't really go into so many details on the Ukraine question in the book, but I touch on it a bit. Think about the role that Turkey, Poland, UK are playing when it comes to defense of Ukraine. This is not really purely a traditional European defense structure. This is not really also a NATO, this is maybe a NATO structure, but you have the Brits, the Polish, the Turks, who are very strong. They're a bedrock of European security right now, from the Black Sea to the heartland of Ukraine. I'm also making the case that we should also encouraging building an architecture in the Middle East or West Asia that does something similar, that allows us to do more with less. And also more with less also means we should not do war of choice, right? You cannot just go start a war on a whim without really understanding the consequences of American power. This is why in the book, my book is almost like a reverse engineering of everything they shouldn't do, which is Iran war right now, right? Like the whole construct of the book is, how can you manage Iran? How can you build coalition around Iran? How can you contain Iran? And by the way, guess what? This framework will actually be very much vital to the day after, because we're not going to have regime change in Tehran. So you have to manage Iran tomorrow. You have to manage Iran in the day after, because it seems that this is where we're heading. And you need to have different partners to shoulder this sort of burden. And by the way, the president of the United States is communicating that. There's a reason why he's going all out of his way to go after the British Prime Minister, because he believed that the Brits should play a role. There's a reason why every day he keeps calling the Europeans, say that you have to come to the defense and opening up of the Hormuz Strait. He's even made the case to the Japanese Prime Minister, who visited Washington a week ago. So the idea of having partners and allies being part of a construct, that's no longer, I would say, no longer a luxury for Washington. You have to do it. You have to build it. Because if you're not building it, at the end of the day, I think you gave yourself a time frame here. You might have this evolving organically.
So let's move from security to prosperity, because you talk about what is needed in West Asia or through West Asia to expand wealth, well-being. And you call for a techno-economic coalition. Also by saying, and you've written about this separately, compute, not crude. In other words, don't emphasize the traditional economic strength of the Gulf states and other energy producers, but find new ways to expand. Can you explain what you mean by techno-economic coalition? And maybe finally, one concept I found really interesting, which I think will bear directly on private sector engagement. It is crisis as catalyst. How do you change the economic structure of the relationships in and through West Asia in a way that makes sense, while still providing energy and all the things that are currently being provided?
I tried in the book to pretend to be a historian. I'm not a historian, I'm an engineer. I tried to be, but my family have opposed that.
Yeah,
But
right.
one of my favorite chapters in the book that I really enjoyed as an engineer, but also as a practitioner, is the chapter on AI. No author will sit down with you and tell you, I had a favorite chapter. I did have a favorite chapter. This is the one on AI, because this is what I do day to day. And I don't think about AI as models. I don't think so. I don't buy the idea of AI as models. I buy the idea of AI as infrastructure. And your phone is relying on compute, and this compute is not just chips that are powered by energy in very much advanced data centers. This is what I call in the book the compute triangle: semiconductors, energy, and data centers. Right now, we have roughly about 80 to 90 gigawatt compute. We measure it in electricity globally. 80 to 90 gigawatt compute, depends on how you measure that. For us to keep just in pace with personal intelligence, robotaxis, physical AI, all these things, we need anywhere between 220, 230 gigawatt compute to 300 gigawatts. Let me add another layer here. Every gigawatt is 40 to 50 billion dollars. Capital is not cheap. Capital is not just money. Those are not just euros. Let me add another layer on top of that. We have something called latency, which is the geographical span of compute to the end user. Either your own personal intelligence, your robo-taxi, your self-driving car. And the latency question is extremely important. It's not really important right now when you're doing like a query on Claude or ChatGPT. No one really cares if it's taking 34 seconds, right? That's not important. Why I'm rehashing all of this to you, why I'm telling you this story? Someone needs to build that. We have, in the United States, we have roughly about 70% of this global compute. The Chinese have about 18%, and the rest of the world have the rest. And this compute is not being built in Europe. It's not being built in South Asia or Southeast Asia. It is being built in the Gulf. And why is that? And we're here at the Arabian Gulf Institute, and you know this better than I do, that this is foundational to the post-oil political economy of the Gulf, which is transformation. The name of the game is transformation. Now, every single new leader in the Gulf after succession comes to power, and this leader has a new plan for his own country. Either the UAE 2031, 2071, or Saudi Vision 2030, or Oman 2040. Every new leader comes and says, this is my own plan for transformation. What's the number one pillar of that transformation? Technology. And that question evolved. Right now, we're in the compute phase, but it started with digital resiliency, 5G, and then we end up with compute and AI infrastructure. And I'm making even the case in the book that Middle East policy is tech policy. There's a reason why every single time we have a new technology question that intersects with national security, it always emerges in the Gulf. First time we started talking about technology and geotechnology, it was the Huawei ZTE question in Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and UAE, because of all the things that they're doing there earlier than other countries outside of NATO. The same thing applies right now with data centers. So to your point on the question of compute, they have the local dedication to build AI infrastructure, it's core to their national identity, to their own transformation. B, the fundamentals work in their favor, energy abundance profile. They have the capital that's dedicated to build this AI infrastructure, like I said, $40 to $50 billion for 1 gigawatt compute. There's a reason why all these hyperscalers are working in the Gulf, because that profile is extremely important. The latency question, which is the role that the Gulf plays, like they are within latency, appropriate latency for 4 billion people from the East Med to the Indian Ocean. And you see this on the commercial side. Let's talk now about companies. The Emiratis are financing, working with the French. You have the 1.4 gigawatt cluster for Mistral AI in Paris. They're working with the Italians on 2 clusters, one in Milan and one in Rome. The same thing with the Greeks. They're building, an interesting fact, the biggest Hindi LLM is being run out of the UAE, Abu Dhabi, servicing India, right? So there is now a new ecosystem around the Gulf states when it comes to compute. This is no longer, because I was accused so many years ago when I started writing about these issues 10 years ago specifically, that those are fancy projects, why you're writing those things, 5G, who cares? Right now, it's very clear that those things actually are foundational to understanding the Gulf today and its own DNA. And I don't think that this war will change the fundamentals. It will change the security profile of the Gulf. Absolutely, there's no question about that. There's going to be a different political risk question around building compute, how to defend it. Is it 5 megawatt is the same as 500 megawatt? Is it the same as 5 gigawatt? Those are completely different infrastructure, but it will not change the fundamentals because it's not going to be in the Gulf. Believe me, it will not be in Europe, and it will not be anywhere in Asia. That's outside of China, of course.
So let me go back to the audience and see if anybody has got other questions you'd like to ask to Mohammed. Yes.
Hello, my name is Federico Petroni, and I am an editor at Limes, the Italian Review of Geopolitics, which had the pleasure to publish an interview with Mohammed in this latest issue. And I was wondering, there's an elephant in the room, which is Turkey. Turkey is the rising power of the West Asia and Eastern Mediterranean. And I was wondering, how do you suggest US grand strategy to adapt to the rise of Turkey, especially since the Israeli government is debating on Turkey being the new Iran?
First of all, great to see you. And again, I'm so sorry I couldn't recognize you. I really appreciate you being here and making the trip out, coming from Italy. I am absolutely cautioning American policymakers to follow this rhetoric of Turkey is the new Iran. I think this is absolutely not helpful. I don't think that this characterizes our real relationship with the Turks, which again has its own ups and downs. But you cannot just go big country after country and keep calling Turkey is the new Iran, X is the new Iran. That's no longer a strategy. This is basically self-destruction. Turkey is a very powerful nation, playing a very important role when it comes to Ukraine. We have a lot of issues with them around Russia, around security, but at the same time, this is a country you have to live with because they're not going anywhere. A strategic player, I think they did a great job in bidding them in different theaters. I mean, Turkish drones, think about how Turkish drones, the Beridar, has changed a lot of strategic theaters, military theaters in the past 8 years. In Syria, in Libya, in Pakistan, in
Armenia,
Azerbaijan, Nagorno-Karabakh, of course, absolutely. So this is a very capable industrial economy that's not going to go anywhere. I'm not going to sit here and pretend to you it's rosy, but this is a relationship you have to live with. You're going to have disagreements. And at the same time, you also have to encourage a detente. You have to encourage balance of power. And this is why I'm all for balance of power in the Mediterranean Sea, in the East Mediterranean Sea, to be much more precise around the question of Turkish claims to certain assets in the region. but that does not mean war. That doesn't mean always direct military confrontation. Because on top of that, the Turkey question is very much core to the future of NATO. And I don't really believe that this is a conversation that anyone here is ready to have.
Hi, Mohammed. Thank you so much for coming here. We're delighted to have you at the Institute. And thank you so much for your book. I'm learning a lot from it. And I also just, I think you're contributing a lot and just forcing this shift in everyone's perspective. Mostly capturing, that we all need to look a bit further east and understanding the dynamics that's happening in the Middle East around that too is really key. And I think, you're perfectly placed for that, having living and then spending all that time in the region. I've been spending like 25 years going back and forth to the Gulf region. And one way that I'm a little bit hesitant to let go of the term Middle East, although honestly I'm fine to get rid of it, but is that the concept of middle, right? So there is still the reality, and if you go to a place like Dubai or anywhere, that they are playing off of this being in the middle between these different land continents. So you mentioned already the huge role that they're playing in Africa, an increasing role in Africa and East Africa, in addition to Asia. But also a lot of work that I'm doing when I look at the transformation programs, also about much more deeper integration to, especially looking at Saudi Arabia, with Europe and with the United States in a way that they weren't before. So it's kind of like an all the above. And that whole idea of them being center powers still seems to me really key in terms of their connectivity agendas and everything that they're doing. So I'm just wondering how you kind of keep that while at the same time, I think rightfully pushing our gaze to understand all those linkages that are going on further east.
First of all, great fan of your work, and I really appreciate your kind words. I spent a lot of time talking to European policymakers. So yes, I did all my travel in Asia. I did all my interviews in Tokyo and Delhi and all the capitals I mentioned in the book. But I did spend a lot of time in Europe. I talked to policymakers, actual officials in Berlin, in London, in Roma, and Greece, of course, in Athens, making sure that this book is applicable to European powers. And I have this chapter that also I like great deals called The New Meaning of East of Suez. That East of Suez is always associated in 1956 with the downfall, or let's say the transition of power from London to Washington, of course, after the Suez War. But I'm making the case that after the Russian invasion of Ukraine and decoupling from Russian energy, you ended basically the post-1991 Eurasian integration, European-Russian coexistence. And at least for the time being, or at least until 2030, I'm not really sure if this sort of story will be revived again. And I'm making the case in the book that West Asia is the future of Europe. We're seeing this in trade, in terms of their trade with the GCC. You have the EU GCC summit, which I think doesn't get that much coverage, and I think it's a very important manifestation of that dynamic. You have the EU-India dynamic and how the Europeans are making a big bet on India as well. You're seeing the EU engaging with the ASEAN. So I'm making the case that this is European strategic space. You do not really have a strategic space. After the Russian invasion of Ukraine, it was Algeria, Egypt, Qatar that stepped in to support Europeans in a moment of need after the war. And for you to build AI infrastructure in Greece and in France and Italy, it is the Gulf states, it is the Emirates. For you to have that sort of energy security, you have to be in the Gulf, you have to work with the Saudis. For you to have mineral security, you have to work with Saudis, you have to work with Egypt. For you to have actually a connection to Asia, you have to be in the Suez corridor. So I'm making the case that this is extremely important to European policymakers. I'm making the case that everyone in that system is operating within a West Asia idea of geopolitics. Some European nations are very much aware of that sort of dynamic. I mean, think about the Greeks and how they're engaging with India. Think about the Italians who are very active in that construct, specifically under Prime Minister Meloni, who I think also added a lot of stability to the political system in Rome. The same thing with the French, who, in my point of view, embodies that West Asian system because of their military footprint. They're aggressive. the go-getter, they get things. They're basically the version of Britain that we wish Britain is, right? And of course, I'm not going to talk about London or Berlin. I think those two countries are in a very interesting position right now.
So you think they should be sending their ships to Hormuz right now?
I mean, you know my intellectual position about the war. I'm absolutely opposed to the war, oppose the idea of Washington launching a war that will have that sort of consequences on the global economy, let alone our friends and allies in the Gulf. But right now, we might end up with the worst possible scenario. An entrenched, cohesive regime that's younger in Tehran. And this is no longer going to be Iraq, Saddam Hussein, 1990s. That's not the geography, not the demography. Has a completely different border profile with Pakistan and Turkey, have a different relationship with China, have a different relationship with Russia. I don't believe that they had an alliance before the war, by the way, just to make sure I'm also very clear. But I'm not sure if that will be the case after this war. So what did we achieve on the strategic side with this war? Yeah, we can argue that we destroyed 6,000 targets, but I mean, I can bring quotes from the great American generals from the Second World War that hitting a lot of targets doesn't really equate with a victory. And I think right now we do not have victory. And I think the only victory I see out of all of this will be Beijing. And there's no way to intellectualize this, to add an intellectual flavor to this. The biggest winner of this war right now is the United States. It's going to be China.
We are almost out of time, and I have planned for you a lightning round. So we've given your book to Donald Trump, to Xi Jinping, to Vladimir Putin, to Viktor Orban, to Tayyip Erdogan. They've all agreed and said, this is a great idea. So I want you to think forward 2 years, and I'm going to read a list of countries. Will these countries be in West Asia, out of West Asia, or it depends? I'm giving you a third choice to if you're chicken out. So are you ready?
I'm not sure why I did not think about this exercise before.
Okay. China. In, out, it depends.
It depends on how this war will end.
Russia.
No,
Turkey.
absolutely.
Iran.
Yes,
Egypt.
yes.
Israel.
No, sure. Depends.
Cyprus.
Yes.
Sudan.
That's a very tricky one. I'm not sure.
Somalia.
Yes.
Afghanistan.
No.
Pakistan.
Yes.
India.
Yes.
Uzbekistan.
No.
Iraq.
I'm not sure.
All the hard ones you're saying, I'm not sure. Azerbaijan.
Yes.
Armenia.
No, sure.
Libya.
No.
All of North Africa.
Nothing North Africa.
Okay. Singapore.
No.
The UK.
Depends.
Indonesia.
Yes.
Japan.
Yes.
South Korea.
Yes.
Australia.
No.
Sweden.
No.
Mexico.
I love Mexico. No. I lived in Mexico for 2 years.
Italy.
Yes.
Greece.
Yes.
Germany.
Depends.
The United States of America.
Yes.
Ahmed, bring it, chart this on a map and send it to me. What stage, ready to put in the version 2, maybe final question, the cover.
Wow.
A great pyramid of Cheops sideways, pointing west, not east, interestingly. So
I am obsessed with triangles. I think this is my engineering background kicks in. I think triangles are important. And I think what exactly signifies a triangle, the most important, I would say the most famous triangle in history and in West Asia specifically is the pyramids. And then when I was talking to my publisher and my designer, I was like, I want something that's not cliche. I don't want something that has arrows and eagle and American flag. And I don't want any of those things. I want something that's much more simple and much more core to the point, to the argument, which is West Asia. And in this case, I end up with putting the pyramids west. I have some fans in certain countries who believe that this is like a hidden symbol for something deeper. I'm not gonna engage in conspiracy theories, but this is also, it looks good on coffee tables.
From any angle. Okay, you have a final comment.
Mohammed, one last question on your thesis. The human capital is very critical to AI, and that's a problem in the Gulf. I mean, right now you have people from abroad. Unless you change your immigration laws where you can do what America did, it integrates people, it assimilates people, it makes them loyal to the system. You can't have AI technology with disposable people.
I understand where you're coming from. Again, as an engineer who lived and worked in a lot of places, that's a model. It worked in Silicon Valley. And that you have a certain immigration system. Other than that will impact or slow down AI ambitions. I think we can argue about geopolitics, we can argue about how this war will end, but I'm not really worried about the question of talent. I agree with you on building indigenous talent, of course, but it will always be side by side because there's a lot of demand over there. And again, I'm not really an expert on the question of immigration in the Gulf, but I think they can absolutely achieve those sort of AI ambitions with the sort of attractiveness that they have for human talent from all over.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Joining us. Thank you. Because we are online, we have a lot more events. Please join us at agsi.org for all of our writing, all of our programs. And we will sign off for this afternoon. Mohammed, thank you very much.
There's books outside.
And there's books outside as well.